Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and welcome back to another episode of ModChat. For those who do not know, this here is my podcast I do in two different forms. First of all, it is available in a video visual form here on the Mr. Mario 2011 YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey channels. Additionally, it is also available in an audio-only form like a podcast, so you can take it around and listen to it wherever the hell you want to. Simply look up ModChat, all one word, on your favorite podcasting app, host, provider, or platform, and you should hopefully be able to find it. I know it's not available on all of them, but it is available on most of them. Either way, this here is my podcast in which I come to you all at least once a month, and I cover things that I find new, interesting, cool, maybe a little bit funny, show and tell, just things like that in the world of video game modding and video game console modding. Typically, I tell people this is not necessarily a news show, but if you do get your news in this form, in this outlet, and you also get entertained along the way, more power to you. That's awesome. Either way, just like the last few episodes, I've been kind of surprised at just like how much stuff has been covered, and this episode is yet again another bigger one here, so we should probably just get into the topics because there's been a lot of good stuff going on. Now for our first share here, it's actually right in the name. This is from MuseBrought1, and this is NX Share, which I had seen on my timeline and I thought was pretty interesting. This here, as it states, is a Nintendo Switch homebrew app to transfer your screenshots and videos to any device via browser. So this is really nice here if you have a modified Switch, if you're able to run custom firmware, and the Switch is a system that I absolutely love messing around with, modding, using, all that fun stuff there. So being able to have in my opinion here, better way of getting screenshots without having to, hook up through USB, use the micro SD card, share or any of that. Like, there's a sharing option that's officially there, where essentially the Switch has its own little web server, but this one looks like this. It is technically a web server that is running here, but it just stays on your network, and then you can use your desktop, your phone, your tablet, whatever it is, to end up accessing the URL that it gives you, and you can see right here, it's just that over port 8080, and then you have this really nice screen here where it's able to separate out screenshots, videos, divide it up by games, homebrew, home screen, airs, all that stuff you're seeing there. And this just looks, this is a really nice way of doing it. So if you're wanting to get some screenshots and videos off your Switch in a little bit of a more optimal way, and you have custom firmware on here, you might want to give NX Share a try. Now, this is a development that is not new here by any means, but I feel like I, as well as many other people, kind of heard about this at the same time, despite it being in development for a while. But this here is Tico, which is also for the Switch, and this here is not an emulator itself. It states here that this is the first custom emulation frontend for Nintendo Switch, which is a controller-first native C++ interface designed for performance, simplicity, and long-term portability. If you're wondering what Tico is, it states here that it is a multi-platform emulation frontend focused on delivering a console-quality user experience. Instead of file browsers, configuration menus, and fragmented tools, Tico provides a unified interface that automatically organizes games, manages assets, and launches emulator cores, none of which are included in the Tico binary itself. It is designed to feel like a real console UI, not a development tool. So we can probably take some guesses over what it might be talking about, what other frontend it might be discussing, but it is not naming it here. However, you could see for the screenshots they supply, this is the actual home screen. This is how the games and such will look on here. This is your console selection. So it's a really nice interface. Now, people might be wondering, what is the deal with this here? Why are we talking about a new frontend on the Switch? Well, it's been in development for several months already, but it ended up having a really big splash a few weeks ago, specifically with 0.70 right here, in which it states that GameCube and Wii joins the party. Now, it looks like so this ended up getting support for the Dolphin core right here, which plays both GameCube and Wii, and also states here that the Dolphin core enables boost mode by default, so that clocks your CPU at 1785 MHz and the GPU at 768 MHz. They say that is within the safe limits there, and I know that you can use other tools to clock even higher if you want to on your Switch, so that will run at a higher clock speed by default, which is needed for this. But this here is exciting because this here is a really easy, accessible way, if you have a modified Switch, of playing GameCube and Wii games in pretty good experiences with pretty decent quality without having to boot up into Linux or Android. And that is the big thing right there. So we now have an actual emulator that has GameCube and Wii compatible cores, and you can keep it all within Horizon OS and of course the Atmosphere custom firmware. So if you didn't want to run Linux or Android, well, you got this covered right here with Tico. Now we're going to start getting to some of the PS4 and PS5 news, some of the bigger stuff here, but this was a little payload here that I thought was pretty interesting. This here is from developer Surigon War, and this is EAP Dumper, which it states is a PS4 payload that backs up the hard drive EAP key from kernel memory. So when you run this payload, it is supposed to dump out and write these following files to optimally a USB drive here. It would be the EAP hard drive key in bin format, the hex, as well as a text file. And the cool thing is this works on firmwares all the way down from 5.03 and all the way up to 13.50. Now, if people are thinking I'm going to be talking about something like a 13.02, 13.04, 1350 jailbreak, no, I'm not. If you're wondering why that's there, the offsets are here, which means once jailbreaks for those firmwares are available, you should be able to still use this payload on there. But this is really nice here because this allows you to dump the EAP key, which is essentially the encryption keys for your specific hard drive on the PS4. So that means that with this key dumped, you can use other tools to decrypt your PS4's hard drive if you so wish to, like on your computer or somewhere else there. Now, typically, to my understanding, you would have had to run something such as PS4 Linux on there. But this is not that. Since this is just a payload, you really just need a way to take your PS4, make sure you can get it into a jailbroken state, and then run a payload. And that's it. You run the EAP Dumper payload, and then you have your files needed on a USB drive. It does look like by default, it does put it on the hard drive as well as a USB drive, but it does say USB output is best effort. The internal data HDD EAP backup is mandatory. So you at least have 2 backups there, which is nice. But yeah, if you ever needed it, or if you want to capture it just in case you need it here, you got EAP Dumper available. Now, this was a really big uproar in the world of PS4 and PS5 here, but there was a pretty big DRM change recently with how both systems end up handling their digital licenses here. This is originally from Lance McDonald here, and there were so many people who reported on this here, so I'm really just going to be pulling 2 of them. But Lance ended up saying, hugely terrible DRM has now been rolled out to all PS4 and PS5 digital games. Every digital game you buy now requires an online check-in every 30 days. If you buy a digital game and don't connect your console to the internet for 30 days, your license will be removed. Now, from this screenshot, and I was actually originally thinking this was Lance's, but this is actually Modded Warfare's right here, you could even see that in this example, it looks like Don't Starve Together Console Edition has been purchased, but it has a remaining time of 20 days on it, and it looks like this would have ended at this point here, well, pretty close to when this video was releasing here. It looks like the valid period end would have ended on May 14th, 2026. Now, he also stated here, games you bought in the past seem to not have this issue, but any game you buy from now on will only work for 30 days without an online check-in. This cannot be avoided by using Activate Console as primary. All digital games now die after 30 days for all owners. Now, at first, people, even myself included, were thinking that this was something that Sony ended up rolling out to kind of discourage people from getting a digital-only version of a game, such as Star Wars Racer Revenge. Let's say they had a PS5, they got Star Wars Racer Revenge digitally, and they immediately disconnected it from the internet in order to wait until their console was jailbreakable, and then they could use that game to utilize it. A lot of people were thinking it was to discourage that, and maybe some other stuff was caught up in the mix here, and maybe it could have been a little bit of that too, but it looked like that this change was actually intentional, and it was confirmed, both in a non-technical way from Sony, but I mean, we're at ModChat here, so we're going to look at the technical way here. Now, Mohammed Adel over on Twitter ended up saying, there's a lot of confusion right now about the PlayStation 30-day DRM issue. People are calling it a random bug or saying it only affects PS Plus games. It's not a bug, and it's happening to regular purchases. I investigated what happened under the hood to see exactly what Sony did. Here is the technical breakdown. First, Sony didn't change anything on the console software side. The expiration timer has always existed to protect subscription content. What changed is how the server issues your .rif, the rights information file, the digital license your console uses to verify you own the game. To test this, I compared the hex data of the RIF files for the exact same game across 2 accounts. one bought before March and one bought recently. For the old purchase, the end timestamp offset is set to 7F, and it's just the remaining is just F. This translates to no expiration date. For the recent purchase, that infinite value is gone. The server now actively populates the end timestamp to expire exactly 30 days out. Bottom line, Sony is simply reusing an existing feature. Any new digital license you get from Sony servers now comes with a 30-day check-in requirement baked directly into the license file. So we could even see these screenshots right here. Yup, it looks like this is the older one here. So this one would just be a perpetual digital license as long as your system still has the content on there, it still has everything installed, and it is still activated as primary. Then it looks like you can take the system offline and you can play this indefinitely as long as you're able to. But then you have another one right here, and nope, this one has changed, this one is different. And there's even an explanation here where, of course, 7F, just all the way until the end, says that there is no expiration date on that digital content. Now, I don't know if I've actually cited this site here on ModChat until now, but this is actually from Reset Era, because there was also another really good post here that also explains the technicalities of it, and this is from Andrew. Now, they stated here, I mentioned earlier in the thread how I had a game that was affected by this and which subsequently fixed itself. I've been doing some further testing to try and understand what is happening. I have a jailbroken PS4 so I can poke around at things behind the scenes. Here's what I found about how licensing seems to work on the PS4. The PS4 will install a license file for all of the content your account owns, regardless of whether or not that content is actually installed. This is a key point if it is true that they are addressing a license exploit. This happens automatically, so if I buy a game on the PS Store website and then turn on my PS4, the license for that purchase is automatically installed. Whether or not you can actually use the license for the game is then further controlled by the activation state of your console, i.e. it is set to primary for offline play, or whether you're online and connected to PSN, in the case of non-primary consoles. In either case, those license files always seem to be present. These license files are valid for an indefinite amount of time for content you own outright, 14 days for content from PS Plus Extra and Premium, and for the duration of your subscription for PS Plus Essential games. What has changed now is that new purchases are not being automatically issued a license file with an indefinite duration. Instead, a 30-day license is issued. I have two recent purchase games I've been able to test this with. Game 1 I purchased on April 9th. I turned on the PS4 on April 21st and a 30-day license for the game was automatically installed. I then installed the game on April 25th. The information screen confirmed the game was only playable offline for another 26 days. Approximately 30 minutes after installing the game, the license had been replaced with one which is valid for an indefinite amount of time, and this remains the case even if I delete and reinstall the game. So that is 16 days between the initial purchase and the license showing as being eligible for permanent offline play. Game 2 I purchased yesterday, April 27th, and I installed the same day. Again, a 30-day license for the game was installed. Unlike the first game, no permanent license has been issued yet. So why is one game behaving differently to another? The obvious thing which stands out is the length of time since purchase. I've owned the first game for 16 days, which puts it outside of PSN's 14-day refund window. So I'm speculating that perhaps people were exploiting the fact that you could purchase a game, grab the indefinite license file for the thing off an exploitable PS4, and then refund the purchase. And Sony is currently mitigating this issue by time limiting the initial license that you are issued. In lieu of actual information from Sony, perhaps we can do some community detective work to validate this. If anyone has a PS4 and recent purchase made prior to April 14th, do you see a time limit on the game once you have installed it? Does it go away after a short while of being connected online? Or if you have a more recent purchase, see if it changes from the 30-day license to indefinite once it becomes more than 14 days. So this here, I would say, is the more plausible reasoning for this here, just to avoid people using any kind of refund exploits from that front. That's what makes more sense to me here once this was tested a bit more. But there we go, that is some information you all might have missed out on or maybe want to know about in regards to the whole thing with licensing changing on the PS4 and PS5. Now I've got one more thing specific to the PS4 here, and this is in the form of a new BDJB release. Now this might be a little bit confusing here because see, this was originally forked from Gajina's BDJB 1250, which even states here, this one is BDJB 1252. It says BDJB for PS4 up to 12.50, and then the instructions here are still the 12.02 instructions. So I know since it's forked and such and wasn't fully updated, it might be a little bit confusing here, but it's really what lies in the releases, and this fork is from developer PS3 120. If you check out the releases here, you can check this out. There's 3 ISOs available. You have the Lapse one, which works up to 12.02, well, it works from 9.0 up to 12.02. A lot of us are familiar with that. These ones are a little bit customized as well too, because they auto-load GoldHEN from bin, they have a different icon. Also, you can see right here, they end up moving the AIO patch to the kernel patch, which is nice. And then there's also the Poopsploit one as well, which, yeah, I'm going to reference it again.
Look, we're adults in here, you can say it.
Poop?
You said poop! I said! I said poop in here!
Poop!
Poop.
Either way, Poops is set up the same way, except it's using the Poopsploit kernel exploit as opposed to the Lapse kernel exploit. But you see this one right here, which is Poops 13, which works exclusively on firmware 13.00. This one was very quietly released here, but the nice thing is now if you have a PS4 on firmware 13 and you do not want to use PlayStation View, or you want another alternative to PlayStation View, you can now use BDJB. On top of that, you can just straight up burn your BDJB disk. As long as it's using this 13 ISO, you can now just burn a BDJB disk, make sure you have GoldHEN on a USB drive, pop it in, run it, and you're good. You don't have to go through the process of setting up View After Free and then unpatching your BDJ stack there, because that's what people are doing before, and I've talked about unpatching before, where essentially in order to use older BDJB disks or even BDJB in general on a higher firmware where it might not be directly available, what you can do is you can typically jailbreak your system using an entry point, and then once you jailbreak your system, you're able to unpatch the BDJ stack, meaning that you put an older BDJ stack on the system, and from there, then you can start using your BDJB disks again. But this is not that. You don't have to unpatch it anymore. Unpatching was available for PS4, but at least on firmware 13, nope, you can just burn this ISO and you're good. Now we're getting to the fun stuff with PS5 here. This here is the release of PS5-HEN from developer Cragson, as well as with contributors Echo Stretch, Cow AR, as well as John Tornblom. Now this here, it states here, is a homebrew enabler for the PlayStation 5. This is a really big one here because check this out. It says that it defeats the hypervisor on firmwares less than or equal to 4.51 and enables support for homebrew and PS4 fake packages. For the supported firmwares, it supports really all firmwares from the original base 1.0 firmware all the way up to firmware 4.51. Now, in order to use this here, you do need a way of jailbreaking your system, so as long as you have something such as UMTX or Y2JB, or really just something available, some kind of entry point that can be used for a jailbreak, you need to jailbreak your system, and then you need to send over the HEN payload, specifically the PS5-HEN payload. And this here is big, yet again, because this is a payload, it's a HEN payload all-in-one that is also able to defeat the hypervisor here, which is really big. Now, there are some known issues, one of them being all firmwares have crashes after launching multiple PS4 fake packages. It currently does not support rest mode, and the speed can be improved for PS4 fake package loading. So we're kind of back to some of the early PS4 issues we had. Like, I still remember some of those early firmwares where, you know, rest mode, it might have worked, it might not, and there were so many people who were wanting rest mode fixes on there, but this here is quite big for another reason. This here was needed because the official Flow ended up releasing PS5 Linux. Now, it states that PS5 Linux leverages a patched hypervisor vulnerability to transform your PS5 Fat console running the 3.x or 4.x firmwares, and soon also on firmware 6.02, into a highly capable Linux PC, unlocking its full hardware potential for desktop use. Oh yeah, little update I'm dropping into this here in real time, as this ended up dropping while I was working on this episode. but PS5 Linux has already been updated. There is now a version 2 which actually ends up supporting firmwares 5.50, 6.0, and 6.02. So previously, where this was only limited to 4.51 or lower, now we are officially at 6.02. Well, I guess here 3.0 to 6.02 firmwares. Powered by 8 cores up to 16 threads at 3.5 GHz and a GPU at 2.3 GHz, it provides enough performance to run Steam games and various emulators with impressive fluidity. It supports HDMI, 4K 60 video, and audio output. Furthermore, it allows you to utilize an M.2 SSD as a dedicated Linux partition, as well as all USB ports on the console. Now, if we check the firmwares available here, it does state here that, yeah, you do need a PS5 FAT specifically. It needs to run on at least firmware 3, and it work up to firmware 4.51. So that's why that hypervisor exploit was so important here. Now, the big difference is here as well, is that if you have a PS5 running on a 3 firmware, so 3.x, you do not have M.2 support. M.2 support end up getting unlocked on firmware 4.0. There might be people who are thinking maybe you can hack this in, or maybe you can backport it, and I'll say this, maybe, but you have to remember, and it's been so many years, so maybe many people don't even know about this here, but when the PS5 first launched, the M.2 port on there for like the SSD, it was disabled at a software level, and Sony had specifically said, we're only going to enable and unlock it once there are drives on the market that are fast enough to be able to be used on the PS5. And once those drives end up hitting the market, that's why on firmware 4.0, they ended up adding M.2 support. I will say I actually have a PS5 on a older firmware, and I believe it came on one of these old ones here. I think I first got it on firmware 3.0, but when I read about that, I said, you know what, I'm going to update it slightly because I do want M.2 support. So I updated mine from 3.0 to, I believe, 4.03. That's what I end up updating it to, and I've kept it on that firmware. But you could see here that soon it's also going to get 6.02 firmware support with M.2 support on that as well. Now, for some of the things you'll need, it states here for hardware, you'll need a USB drive with a minimum 64 gigabytes, ideally an external SSD to install and run Linux. You're also going to need a USB Ethernet or WLAN adapter for internet access, and a USB keyboard and mouse. And the optional ones are the Bluetooth dongle to connect with the PS5 DualSense controller. That's actually interesting. You can't just connect it on there directly, like you can't just, Bluetooth pair it, but that's neither here nor there. And then also optional is that M.2 SSD. You will need to enable rest mode, disable HDMI device link, and it's recommended to disable automatic updates and disable automatic error reporting, which, yeah, that makes sense there. You do have to bring your own Linux image, which there are ways where you can make your own image, but I'm sure there's also going to be images that are going to be floating out there as well too. You put it onto a USB drive, you plug that into your PS5, and then from there, you're able to run the exploit. Real quick again, as a part of that recent update, it looks like here, if you're looking to run the jailbreak, you can use the UMTX2 jailbreak method here, all the way up to firmware 5.50, but if you're on firmware 6 or 6.02, you'd end up using Y2JB as recommended here. And I did mention PS5-HEN earlier, and that was so important because it ended up releasing the hypervisor exploit for this, but the hypervisor exploit, from what I see, is built into this payload. So once you have your jailbreak set up and everything, all you need to do is send over the PS5 Linux Loader payload, and from there, you'll be able to start booting your system into PS5 Linux. Now, there's even more information here, for example, on the first boot, what you can do, setting up your M.2 drive, and even fan and boost control as well too is available. But for some frequently asked questions, will firmwares 6.50 or higher be supported? No. Why can I not use M.2 on 3.x? And it says because the PS5 fails to boot with it attached. Can I dual boot Linux and PS5 OS? No, this is a soft mod. You need to rerun the exploit in order to boot into Linux. Can I put Linux into standby and resume? No, this is not supported. We may, however, add a shutdown feature that puts your PS5 into rest mode, allowing you to relaunch Linux when powering up again. Can I continue using my PS5 if I install Linux? Yes, the internal SSD is not modified. Can I use the PS5's NIC or WLAN module in Linux? In theory, yes, but someone needs to write or adapt drivers to use them. So that's why they were requiring having that adapter on deck. Does the DualSense controller work? Yes, it is via a Bluetooth dongle. Built-in Bluetooth is not supported yet. And then lastly, what resolutions and refresh rates are supported. We got 1080p, 1440p, and 2160p at 60 Hz are broadly supported. 1440p at 120 Hz has been the only confirmed working on the Dell S32225QC yet. 120 Hz or 30 Hz may be added in the future. So there we go. If you have a PS5 on an old enough firmware and you want to mess around with PS5 Linux here, you can certainly do that. And the nice thing is too, the really cool thing about this is that not only gaming Linux, I should say, has matured so much, so it's actually a lot more viable to look towards Linux as a gaming platform. But even so, I'm seeing a lot more excitement with this on PS5, and I think it's twofold compared to the PS4. One of the things is that the PS5 is still a really powerful system. Even the base PS5, like the fat system or the base one, that's the one I still have, and I'll be honest, even with my usage on there, I haven't felt a need to get a PS5 Pro. Any games that have been kind of lacking on there, I'm more just like, I think this needs to be optimized more. I think this kind of just needs more time to cook. We don't need a whole new system for this. However, when it comes to this as well, I know that there was also Linux on the PS4, and I've messed with it before, but the images I used to use with PS4 Linux were okay. You know, they weren't the best, but they were okay. But then when it came to it as well, people were also trying the PS4 Pro with Linux, and there just wasn't a huge performance boost there, unfortunately, and it was believed that it was because of the drivers, where really the drivers that were used on the base PS4 were the same ones that were on PS4 Pro, and they weren't updated or optimized for the Pro, so that's why you really didn't have that much of a boost on there. It wasn't that the system wasn't that powerful, but you didn't get a huge boost. So you kind of had something that was almost like a mid-tier gaming PC at best. But with PS5 Linux, with how good it seems to be, with the improvements it's getting, and also with how powerful the PS5 is, it's actually a pretty awesome, pretty serious contender here. Oh, and one last thing with PS5 Linux, it actually seems to be certified, kind of unofficially in some way. Let me just show you the screenshots here. These were screenshotted from the Flow on Discord, but he said, I have official permission by Sony for PS5 Linux, by the way. And then if you move over here, it looks like he ended up quoting what a Sony representative, presumably from HackerOne, ended up telling him. But they stated here, your research contributions to the PlayStation homebrew community are appreciated. Since this falls outside the scope of active vulnerability disclosures, you're welcome to proceed with your planned public release. Now, not only that's poetic to some degree, because not only Linux on the PS3 and other OS was a huge battle right there. In short, that's when the PS3 was really getting hacked up a bunch. It was getting modified and hacked up before, but there was a huge push for it once other OS was removed. And even Sony had to legally pay for it, quite literally. There were people who had to get payouts, and there was other legal issues that happened because Sony had sold the system for years with that feature and then ended up taking it away. And we didn't have Linux officially on PS4, and we don't have it officially on PS5, but to me, I'll just say this for anybody who might be wondering why they are okay with this here. I would say it's because it's not only out of their firmware technically, since yes, you do have to jailbreak the PS4, but then you end up running this payload and you boot up into an entirely different OS, but it's also on such old firmwares and technically on old consoles there where they're really not worried about it. If this was something you could do on the latest and greatest firmware right now, sure, but right now you have to go out and find a PS5 that has not been updated for several years in order to do this. And since it's really just loading up another operating system on those old outdated PS5s, I can see why they're not really too concerned about it. Now we have another PS5 development here, and this one is technically with Gajina's Lua core, which has been updated. It has been updated here. You don't really see it officially, but I'll explain it here. It's been updated to 2.2D, and they stated here that they added PS5 12.x and 13.x kernel offsets, and they also updated the ELF loader to the 13.20 version. However, I'm citing this here because there is a new bad update level jailbreak available for this. You can now jailbreak the PS5 up to firmware 12.70 using Lua core, and if you're using Lua core, you do have to use Star Wars Racer Revenge for this here. However, this is interesting because you can see here there is a new contributor here, which I'm going to try to say their username here, Chabrick3000. Hopefully I got that kind of right, maybe there. But if you look down below here, they stated they ported P2JB kernel exploit to Lua core. And if you're unsure what that is here, it is within the payloads. It's a Lua payload, and here we go, p2jb.lua. And essentially now what you're able to do is this is a new jailbreaking option. Now, again, you do need a PS5. This does work up to firmware 12.70, and you need the game Star Wars Racer Revenge. But once you have this all set up here, you end up just running it, and then P2JB can start running. Now, that is short for Patience to Jailbreak, and it's called that because when you run it, it takes about 2 hours to run. I'm not kidding. It takes 2 hours, and even then it might fail out. So you run it for about 2 hours, and if it works successfully, awesome, you have a jailbroken system. If not, you got to restart and you got to try again. Now, I don't think this is going to catch on all too much. Not only you still need Star Wars Racer Revenge, but a lot of people aren't going to want to wait 2 hours for a possibility of getting their system jailbroken here. But one thing that you can do, it even states here that Poopsploit payload requires 12.0 or lower firmware on PS5. So the nice thing is that you can still use BDJB as long as you unpatch up to firmware 12.0. So the idea here could be, in order to avoid using P2JB every time, you could set up your game. So again, Star Wars Racer Revenge, you can use Lua Core to run P2JB. You let it run for 2 hours, hopefully it runs successfully, and then you immediately run the BDJ unpatch payload, and from there, you can just use a BDJB disk every time you want to jailbreak your system. So it's another option there. Let me know if you would be wanting to wait 2 hours every time. To me, it kind of sounds unbelievable, even though it does work. But at the same time, I saw people through the bad update era when it first launched, and there were people who would spend hours trying to run it on their Xbox 360 to get it to work successfully, and they would just keep it on for days on end. So at least we have a better option here. You can unpatch BDJ. Additionally, there's also been an update in the form of a fork to Remote Lua Loader from developer Not Major. Now here it states here that the Remote Lua Loader is for PS4 and PS5 based on Gajina's finding that allows games built with Artemis Engine to load arbitrary Lua file. This loader is not firmware dependent and has been successfully tested on PS5 Pro 10.40. However, here, this is important because this fork ends up also integrating in P2JB. So at this point now, you are no longer just limited to having Star Wars Racer Revenge if you want to use P2JB on one of those higher firmware systems. You can also end up using any of these 18 games available here. I guess there is one or two. Yeah, there's 2 demos included. And I'm not going to name off all these here, but these in short are the visual novels, or what people are calling the weeb games. And I will cite on this real quick too, because I've been called out on that. I mean that with love. I'm one of those people. I actually do love visual novels. I play visual novels. Some of my favorite games are visual novels. So when I say this here, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, not trying to be insulting, but I mean, if you look at any of these games, just look up any of them, that's what they are here. Well, actually, there's 3 demos here, so there's a few available. But yes, about the same thing on this as well, too. Like I've said, since this is Patience to Jailbreak, you will need patience once you get it set up. If you have a system up to firmware 12.00, it would be best advised to run either Lua Core or the Remote Lua Loader with P2JB. Once you get your jailbreak, immediately use the BDJ unpatch method on there, and then just use your BDJB disks, and you should be good. And now that we're done with that, we're going to go to some older Sony systems here, and we're going to be focusing on the PSP first here. Now, this is talking about a custom firmware I know and love, which is Arc 4, and this is a little bit of an end of an era here. Now, it's no secret that they've been working on Arc 5 for some time now, but Arc 4 has officially gotten its final update. And let me go ahead and explain it actually using the developer's own words. We can go ahead and check out the revision 206 release here, and they stated here, there is a reason why this time I am using the full version number. It's a pretty big number that has a lot of history behind it. I've been working on Arc 4 for the past 6 years and had the pleasure of working with some of the best minds in the PSP scene. It has been quite a ride, and like all rides, it eventually comes to an end. Arc 4 has become technologically complicated to work with. It uses an old SDK that is no longer maintained, it has a lot of legacy code that can be replaced by much better and simpler approaches, and it has become overscoped. The project has to do things it's not meant to, or that should be responsibilities of other projects. This is the last official release of Arc 4, which is only here to serve as a bridge for what's going to replace it. Arc 5. Because I did not stop working on Arc 4 because I stopped working on PSP custom firmware, but because I can best reserve my time and efforts on the next big evolution of this beloved custom firmware. Update to this last release to unlock the Arc 5 OTA updates, and then update to Arc 5 or not, it's your choice. And for anybody who might be confused and thinking, wait, Arc 5? Yeah, Arc 5 has been in development for some time. You can see that it looks like this is actually initially started 9 months ago here. This is the official GitHub repository for it, and there's not all too much information here, so it's not nearly as fleshed out as Arc 4, nor should it really be used for prime time unless you are willing to be a developer or test it, or you're just curious about it. But you can see there's not too much information here, although it does state it's a next generation custom firmware for the PSP and the Vita's ePSP, and then with the features so far, it's been compiled with the latest PSP SDK, easier installation and usage, better plugin management in the XMB, true overclocking for all PSP models except for the Street and Vita, improved memory management for consoles with extra RAM, and lots of under-the-hood fixes and improvements. Currently, there is one release here. If we go over here, there is a pre-release that ended up coming out about 2 weeks ago, so you can see that zip file and you can mess with it if you want to. But yeah, that's all to say here. I'm sure this is, you know what, once this drops and once Arc 5 is fleshed out, I'm sure it will be kind of funny going back to this episode here and just looking at probably, and I mean this respectfully, how bare the README was compared to how it will be looking in the future, and I'm looking forward to that. Now we're going to be going all the way back over to the PlayStation 2, and this is from PS Wired here, and this is for a new exploit released for the PS2 called Memdusa from 01UP and Blackburn 29. Now this is different because this here is a network exploit that has been released for the PlayStation 2. For the usage here, it states start the server and have your PS2's DNS address pointed to your DNS server or proxy. Select a game that is supported and connect online. Ulaunch ELF should load. This is a heavily cut down version of it and only has USB support. Make sure whatever homebrew you want to load after is on a USB drive and plugged into the PS2. So realistically, if you want to mess around with this here, this would be, I would say the optimal use for this would be you have your PS2, you get it connected to your network, you then end up running Memdusa on it, and then once you get booted into Ulaunch ELF, from there you can load it from a USB drive or something, but you can load up something like the free McBoot installer, or you can copy over something else such as Funtuna or OpenTuna to a memory card. Then you can restart the PS2, and from there you can get your unsigned code access on boot or pretty quickly after boot without having to run Memdusa every single time. Now, it states here that there's a few supported games, and the games that are supported, and it shows really like the domains and stuff that are here, because you'd have to set that up within your proxy, because essentially what this will do is once you're running your server and you have your PS2 pointed to it, as opposed to Killzone, for example, reaching out to Killzone prod over here on this address, this will kind of man in the middle it, so it's going to run Memdusa, which is cool to see. Now, for the supported games here, you have Killzone, SOCOM 2, specifically running patch R0004, SOCOM 3, the base game and version 2.3, SOCOM Combined Assault, the base game and patch 1.4, Siphon Filter, the Omega Strain. Actually, there's two versions of it. The US version and the European version both work. Some of these games have their own specific notes here. There's also instructions on if you want to use Retro DNS as a proxy. And if you want to know a little more about how it works, they state the majority of the games that use Medius for online play have a packet that allows the server to write anything you want to anywhere you want in memory. That's hilarious, actually. But that was the PS2. That's how it went. This takes advantage of that. Once the payload is written to memory, the very next request the game makes to the server will load the ELF. Now for some frequently asked questions, why isn't game name supported? The answer here is either the game requires a DNS bypass to even get online, or the game lacks the functionality to write the payload to memory. Games that require a DNS bypass also tend to require you to be able to load up a patched backup of the game, which means you would need to be able to run homebrew. Can I run this on a remote server and have anyone use this? And they state here, at the moment, no. The payload in general is pretty big, and most of the games will time out when doing this to a remote server. All I did was gut a working ELF launcher to get it to work locally. If someone wants to work on making a smaller loader, please do. Can I get this to work with any ELF? And the answer here is yes and no. From what I've seen, most ELF files exist in the 001-0000 memory range, and most games have running code in that area. You would need to recompile the ELF to load from a different memory location, which is what I did with Launch ELF. I found the 01CF3400 range to be empty in these games, but that's not always the case. The butchered source code to Launch ELF is included in the repo. Finally, why is it called Memdusa? This utilizes the memory write packet, and I froze my console far too many times testing this. Maybe you thought we were done with PSP news, but no, this is the last one here, at least in this episode. This here is a fork of SNES 9X TYL. This was originally forked from developer 173210, and from what I saw, the original one hadn't been worked on since 2015. So why are we talking about this here about 11 years later? Well, developer Onimok ended up forking this here, and they've ended up releasing a new build of it. And if you check this out, this here is SNES 9X TYL Mod Revival Project, which is stated as a modernized and performance-focused revival of SNES 9X TYL for PSP and PS Vita, designed to handle large ROM collections and improve real hardware performance. Now, it states here for some of the key improvements. First of all, there is a ultra-fast directory browser, in which it said before it took about 20 seconds from black screen to load to bring on about 1,000 ROMs, and that was a hard limit, and now it loads in a few seconds and supports up to 4,000 ROMs per folder. There's a favorite system, so you can now mark your most played ROMs as favorites for instant access. There's now multi-language support, so you have native runtime support for Portuguese, Spanish, English, Japanese, and simplified Chinese, and there's also automated releases for this as well. Now, I'm bringing this up because this is also really exciting because the last episode, if you missed it, I end up talking about utilizing the media engine to really get the most performance out of the PSP and how the media engine itself can be overclocked, and the developer was even wondering about which types of applications might have used it or why they didn't use it in the past. And actually, this was brought up as well too. It was cited directly that the original SNES 9X TYL ended up using the media engine. And that's nice because it's just funny, after all of that, we end up seeing the same thing here, which I'll scroll up. Here we go. So here, if you look at the installation, there's actually two different builds of it. There's the ME version, which is the media engine version. And it says that that one is best for all PSP models. It uses the media engine for hardware accelerated sound, which is great here. There's also the CM or compatible version, which is recommended for PlayStation Vita using Adrenaline or ECFW and legacy setups. But then just setting it up here is really just extracting out the file that you download and putting it in the right place here, game SNES 9X TYL. So these are two old things here combining into something new, but here you go. If you've wanted to mess around with SNES games or play more SNES games on your PSP, it might be worth trying out this modded version of the emulator here. As a little bit of a fun but pretty cool addition here, and I love covering these for the Xbox 360, we have a little release here called Gameplay Time Tracker, which is a script created by MZ1CEW and paired with a boot plugin by Durf, which tracks your individual playtime in games. Simply install the included XEX as a boot plugin and the Gameplay Time Tracker as a utility script, and it will track the games automatically, and you can view the results in the Gameplay Time Tracker script. We can see it right here. We got a nice screenshot here where you could see this is just one of the games, for example, where you have a total play time of, 360 hours in this example. And it looks like, not surprising at all, Halo 3 is number one on this list at almost 248 hours here. But for the features here, it is able to track time for 360, original, and games on demand games. It shows all the running total of the games, allows you to manually mark games as completed. You are able to hide games such as homebrew tools, and you can even set the time for a game. So for example, if you know you have about 200 hours in Skyrim, you can enter 200 hours. And that was one thing people were asking. They were like, wait, can this account for my time I've already put in? And the answer is no. You'll just have to kind of add that in manually. But yeah, if you've been curious of having a gameplay tracker of some kind, and that's actually something I've liked on newer systems, like I've liked seeing it on the 3DS and on the Switch and Switch 2, for example, you got it now if you want to set this up in Aurora. And this isn't necessarily news, but on the topic of Xbox 360 and modding and all that stuff here, and just things that I find interesting, I think anybody who's messed with this stuff, like networking on there, might get a little bit of a kick out of this. This is from Grim Doomer, who has worked on on so many awesome things for the PS2, the Xbox, the original Xbox. I mean, if you know of the term bad update, you can thank Grimdoomer for that here. But he stated here, here's something I found interesting while working on some 360 stuff. The infamous 30 millisecond ping limit on system link traffic isn't actually a ping limit. It's a timeout on the console to console key exchange messages. Once the key exchange is complete, there's no ping limit. And Derv even asked here, do you see a way that the initial key exchange could be completed faster than the limit for X-Link Kai to bypass it on unmodified consoles? Like, could an initial key exchange be emulated by the Kai client, and then a new real key exchange be initiated without a ping limit? To which Grim answered here, you can man in the middle of the connection, but you might need something out of the key vault. I'd have to dig into it. Oh, and for anybody who might inevitably be asking about this, because I am citing Grimdoomer here, this is an important update from him. He does say no updates on the soft mod, but I found a frog. And if you click this here, well, gotta let it load in, it's a 7-second video of a frog he found. So there you go, that's an update to the soft mod. Now the Xbox One gets an interesting release here from developer TuxUser, and this here is Durango RF Unit I2C tooling, aka Sonus for Xbox One. And in case you don't know what that is, the Sonus was a device on the Xbox 360 where you could wire it up into a few places and then you could program it directly and you could have custom sounds on your Xbox 360 Slim and even your Xbox 360 Fat. I've installed a few of them. They're fun little devices. And it's one of those things that it's cool, people know of them. But I will say real quick, I've been surprised at the resurgence for some kind of demand for them in the last few years. I do remember when they came out, I was excited. I ended up buying a few of them. I installed them. I liked them. But the overall sentiment a lot of people thought was, this is stupid. I'm not going to get it. And from what I see, they didn't sell very well, and now they're pretty coveted items, and people do want those kind of to collect, but also even just to install and have those custom sounds. So people look for other options, but now we also see that in other systems, for example, now the Xbox One. So this is for the original Xbox One here, and it states, yeah, tools for the Xbox One RF unit flash dumping, writing, and firmware editing with custom audio here. It does feature two things, the RF unit tool, which plays sounds, dumps flash, and writes flash, and the VPE tool, which plays sounds from firmware and injects custom audio. And actually, forgive me here, it looks like this does work on the original Xbox One and even the One S. I did not know it supported the One S. You do need an I2C interface, so you choose one. You can either use a great FET1 board, a Raspberry Pi, or some kind of MicroPython device like an ESP8266, an ESP32, a Pi Pico. So yeah, something like that. It's funny how it differentiates the Raspberry Pi non-Pico and then you got the Pi Pico here, but I get that there. Now it looks like for a quick start here, you just have to wire up your I2C connections and then you use the GUI or the CLI tool to do all of your programming. There are hardware connections mentioned here, but for a direct Xbox motherboard connection, it does show this. And these are some really great diagrams. So if you're going to use a Raspberry Pi Pico, which I'm sure most people want to do, this is how you wire it up for the original Fat model. And this is how you wire it up for the 1S model. And it looks like it's only 4 wires here, and I'm just kind of looking at this. Solder bridge for dumping, unsolder bridge for normal connection. So it looks like for the original Xbox One, you would have to do a slight modification right there. But even with this, if you've done small modifications, this doesn't look too bad. It's just 4 wires you have to wire up there. Even so, I guess if you want to, not for the original, but for the 1S, you might even be able to avoid some of the soldering. Like, I'm even thinking if you just solder the wires directly to the Pi Pico, and then maybe you just have like some metal tips at the end, such as needles or something, you can even populate them right here into the actual connector. Otherwise, you can just solder them to the back of this. So it doesn't look too bad. Then it looks like if you want to use the GUI version of this here, there's a couple of these screenshots. So you have this, it looks a lot like this here. Looks easy enough to use. That's the main operations there if you want to give this a try, if you want to play a few things. If you want to, of course, dump the flash or flash something new, you're able to do that as well. And there's also another screenshot here of the audio tool as well too, where this one ends up giving you really like the nitty gritty of everything here and just all the information on different like dings and sounds and such here. Plus it looks like actually this one's been dumped from a Halo 5 system, so it breaks down everything on this. But yeah, if you've ever wanted to customize the sounds on your Xbox One or Xbox One S, well, you have this tool to do it now. Now, I don't cover Wii all too often on here, but you know what? I kind of just want to cover this here just to show that it exists, because I know there's people who love the Wii and they love Jellyfin, and there's now a Jellyfin client for the Wii from developer Fabian Millet, which is WiiFin right here. It states that WiiFin is an experimental homebrew client for Jellyfin built specifically for the Nintendo Wii. It provides a lightweight, console-friendly media browsing and playback experience, written in C++ using GRRlib and mplayer.ce. It's still stating that it's experimental, and it does have a lot of things that do work on here, but some of the limitations are that direct play is not supported, so all video is transcoded by the server. You do not have 5.1 multi-channel audio, stereo only via transcoding, and subtitle rendering relies on the server embedding them into the video stream, so don't expect the Wii to do a whole bunch of heavy lifting here. They also had a screenshot here of it running within the Dolphin emulator. If people are asking if people are really going through the Dolphin emulator for it, I have no doubt it's for testing. I don't think people are firing up Dolphin just to use WiiFin for their Jellyfin server, unless they're testing it here. But you can see when you launch it, it just looks a little something like this. You have your settings, you have your exit option, and you can connect Jellyfin, which is what most people want to do. If you have a Jellyfin server up and running and you have a Wii, maybe give this a try. Oh, by the way, for the website for this release here, you all got to see this. Look at this. Look, this is the actual website itself. There's Discord link, the GitHub link, and if you click on the GitHub, boom, it brings you right here. That's awesome. I love that. Now, another game which was really known on the Wii, and yes, I know it was also known on the GameCube as well too, but let's be real. Also, I was there for the time as well too. This was a huge system seller for the Wii. This was a huge one. But Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess ended up getting decompiled, but also ported to the PC in the form of Dusklight. This is the official website right here, and it even states that Dusklight brings a classic adventure to PC and mobile platforms with a variety of fixes and improvements. Now, you can download it here, but much like these ports you usually have to do, it says you must provide a dump of your own copy of the original game to run Dusklight. You can see the footage here that's been playing, and the website is phenomenal, by the way. Like, I love this layout. This looks great. But you can see this looks really solid as well, too. For anybody who might be wondering why you might want to play this instead of just emulating it, well, I guess just look into native ports and such and see what you can do, because there's always going to be people, if you show a native port, they'll be like, well, you could just emulate it, and I think even vice versa as well too. But typically, yes, it is nice to have emulation, but if you can get a native port of a game, you can do so much more, and you can really push the limits and boundaries of what was previously available. Now, for the features here, it is cross-platform. It says thanks to the Aurora compatibility layer, Dusklight supports Windows, Linux, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. And that's just from the official repo, by the way. This doesn't include the people who've been forking it and who've been porting it to other consoles as well. Here we go, Unchained graphics, no longer constrained by early 2000s hardware. Dusklight runs at much higher resolutions and frame rates, as well as quality of life. Whether you prefer an authentic experience or a more modern one, Dusklight offers many gameplay options. So you have something pretty awesome here. You can click on download here if you want to download this. You could also go to the other platforms, and it will bring you to the latest build here over on GitHub, which you can see here. They also have Android ARM64 builds, iOS, Linux, Mac OS, and of course Windows. So this is probably going to be one of the most definitive ways, if not the definitive way, to end up playing Twilight Princess. Now, what I like to do at the end of these episodes, and yes, we are at the end here, is I like to pick something that is cool or interesting or funny or maybe tangentially related to the world of modding. And the PS3 is a system that I believe is known and loved and really covered a lot on this channel here. So I thought this was an interesting tweet. I want to save it and share it with you all later here. But this is from Millie A, and they end up saying here, in February 2026, the PS3 still had 1.1 million active users. Just 1 month later, in March, that number dropped to 240,000, largely driven by Netflix ending support on the platform. South America and the Middle East have the most PS3 active users in 2026. So that's just a curious thing there. And really for people who've been wondering, hey, who was or who is playing the PS3 in 2026? Well, you have some numbers right here. How many people are on it? You have that as well too. And yeah, Netflix was a huge driver of that PS3 traffic. So you see how, I mean, about 75%, 75 close to 80% of the traffic end up just disappearing from daily active PS3 users simply by Netflix cutting off the PS3. Just interesting to see. Either way, that is about it for this episode of ModChat. If you enjoyed this episode, thank you very much for making it to the end here and hopefully enjoying it and maybe learning a few things. If you were entertained, that's a nice bonus as well too, as I said at the top of the episode. But if you've never made it to the end of one of these episodes, first of all, welcome, and secondly, I'll tell you what we do here. Typically what I like to do is I like to pick something off my desk or just something I'm kind of randomly thinking of, and I'll use it as a keyword or a key phrase. And if you use that keyword or key phrase in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode. It's a little fun thing we like to do. Either way, this episode is certainly no exception. I end up having a new addition on my desk here, which I actually wanted to show you all. I guess this is a bit of show and tell. But check this thing out right here. This is just one of those like capsule toys you can get. My girlfriend ended up seeing this and then she wanted to get it, and it now lives on my desk here because that's usually how that goes sometimes. But this is check this out. This is why I love this thing so much. I don't know if you saw that, but there's a tape in there. Not like a literal tape, but you can actually, like, it's pretty nice and true to form in some way, although obviously smaller. But the nice thing is you can actually load this thing in here, close it up. There's also some buttons on the top here, and if you play them, it will play like some snippets of music. Nothing anybody here, I'm sure, has heard of or, you know, tuned into or anything, but still a nice little trinket, I guess. It has some usability. I'm more just like, I'm just going to keep dropping that. I'm more just like that portion of it, the tape right there. But let's go ahead and use that. Actually, let me pick this thing up. Okay, there we go. If you use the word tape in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you made it to the end. When was the last time you ended up using a VHS tape? Do you still rock cassette tapes? Do you have any tapes in your collection? Do you prefer Scotch tape or packing tape or maybe duct tape for certain things? I know you're supposed to use them all for different things, but I'm one of those people, for example, I used to use electrical tape and I didn't really like it that much even when I used it. And I just do everything I can to avoid electrical tape. Kapton tape is clearly superior in every way, so we're not going to be rocking that. But if you want to talk about some tapes in the comments, I'm certainly going to be welcome to it. Either way, that is about it for this episode of ModChat. If you enjoyed it, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. And as I always say, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for listening and watching, everyone. And until next time.